What's going on, everybody? I am so excited today. I get to have a conversation with what I would consider a friend, a partner of the channel, somebody I really respect, and an important person in the hobby. And that is Mr. Chris Hoj. How are you, my friend?
Doing great. Thank you for the kind introduction, and I'll just return a little bit of the sentiment and say that it really kind of traces back. I mean, I've always had my eye on YouTube content, and I love hobby content. But really, when Jeremy of Sports Cards Live brought me into his fold and allowed me to become a recurring presence on Sports Cards Live on Saturday nights, it was around that time that he kind of opened my eyes to what I call today as a renaissance in the pre-war and vintage card collector community. And it's a renaissance of content. And you were one of the channels I immediately gravitated to. But there's a lot of great creators who are in your lane, and you work with a lot of them. And it's kind of it's a milestone. It's pretty special to me to be on this channel now.
Oh,
Given that I started watching it pretty voraciously about 6 months ago, and then here we are. So it's great
yeah.
to be with you, my friend.
Well, I really appreciate that. And we got to meet for the first time at the National, at the Card Ladder booth. And we started talking about stuff. And then we had a meeting and talked about just some thoughts about Card Ladder. And at the time, and I told you that at that moment, I had VCP, I had Market Movers, and I had Card Ladder. And I was like, I'm not really using the other two anymore because I think Card Ladder is the best one. And I had a couple of pieces that I was like, well, why don't you do this? And you're like, we do. And I was like, what about this? And you're like, we do. And so we met and we talked, and I'm like, yeah, there's no reason for me to even have these other apps. And so I took my giant midlife nation flag, I planted it in the in the corner of Card Ladder, and I'm really glad that I did. And we're in an interesting time right now in the hobby. I think that there's some concern. I think that there are some people that are a little bit worried. They're not sure what is real, what is not real, what is real, what's a real comp, what's not a real comp, what's a real auction house, what's a pretend bidder, what is happening. And I wanted to do this 3-part series, and I'm truly honored that you're coming on to give some insight to everybody out there about what is real, what is really happening. And I started with Joe Perot, our buddy, and now I guess it's really a Sports Cards Live trio. And then we've got you, and then we'll have Jeremy Lee. And so I have a few topics that I want to cover with you. So I'm going to put here on the screen, if you are watching, just a quick reminder that Card Ladder is a partner of the channel, and they are fully midlife approved. We got the midlife stamp right there, approved on Card Ladder. I literally don't have any other card apps on my phone anymore, except for Card Ladder. And as always, remember, you can get $20 off a 1-year subscription or 1 month to Card Ladder using the promo code midlife. So I want to be very open and honest about that. All right, so let's get into it. The first question I think that I have is, how do you see Card Ladder? Do you see Card Ladder as a data compiler or a card valuation app?
Yeah, this is a good question. I heard you and Joe kind of go back and forth about this a little bit. And it comes down to the definition of these terms, right? Like, what do we mean when we say data? What do we mean when we say value? And I'll just partition it this way. Card Ladder is a product that has a suite of features, but the most used screen, and practically speaking, the most frequently occurring use case, is somebody just opening sales history and going to town, doing research, poring over. There's hundreds of millions of sales in there, going back to the early 2000s, and that is the most frequently occurring use case. So from that point of view, Card Ladder is data. It's a sales repository, or as we call it, it's sales history. And this is data that is a specific set of data. So we're not tracking, or we try not to import sales of like game used jerseys or something like that. It's a great category, but it's not what we're here to do. We are here to collect and retrieve prices that are printed by marketplaces within the trading card industry. So it's a repository of those things. It's a database of those things, and it's hundreds of millions of those things. Though that's a data set, and and then as we transition to the other part of this question, well, what about value? Do we do anything that relates to value? Value, I think, is there's a level of subjectivity to value. I think, like in the context of this discussion, value is something that a collector, a dealer, a buyer, a seller, a speculator, an investor, whatever the hat is that the person is wearing, that they have to use their wisdom, their experience, their insights to assign a value to something. And I think like a good example of that is sort of the movement that has occurred that I've been imbibing and learning from and thinking about deeply in the vintage and the pre-war community, which is the eye appeal movement. The eye
Mhm.
appeal movement, I think, is a good example of how value can truly be in the eye of the beholder. It's quite literally in the name itself, eye appeal. It's the different eyes. A card might appeal in a wide variety of ways. So there might be a PSA 4, for example, that person A thinks is fantastic, and they're very happy with the price they paid for it, and person B might look at it and say, I don't think it's that great. I don't value it that high. So when value gets involved, it gets subjective, and I think that there's a lot of space for collectors and users of pricing apps to access data, but ultimately come to their personal identification of what the value of that card might be to them.
It's a great question, or it's a great response to my question. It is a great question too, but I think what you're saying is something new in the hobby for a lot of us. See, when I was a kid, we had the Beckett magazine, and it was, well, the Beckett says the price is this. So this is the price. And it was like this universally accepted thing that whatever Beckett says the price is. And I think that the hobby has evolved so much further from that, that it's not, here's a copy of the card and it's not beat up, therefore it's equal to all other cards. I think grading probably helped people start to define the different criteria of how nice a card is. So in some ways, I think grading helped teach us differentiation between cards. And I do think there's a renaissance right now of eye appeal. And I mean, Jeremy Lee's Joe Jackson Cracker Jack card is a brilliant example of how important eye appeal is over grade. I mean, I would take his copy of that card over most copies of that card. And as you're talking, it's funny. I was sitting there smiling as I was listening to you, and I looked at the screen. I caught myself smiling as you were talking. But what one of the things I love is how people tick and how things work and how people think and why they have the opinions that they do. And you are one of the most analytical people I've ever met. And you are constantly not just talking about the topic, you're talking about the reasoning behind the topic. And when we say value, if you've been around the hobby a long time, like myself, like yourself, like a lot of our friends, like Joe Perot, there was a time where it was easy to define value because Dr. Beckett's monthly magazine did that for us. But if people are expecting to have the value given to them and provided to them like that, that those days are behind us as far as I'm concerned. And it sounds like that's what you're saying as well. And I want to share the screen again. I want to put something else on the screen, and then I want you to respond to what I just had to say. So this is the card ladder dashboard. And if you scroll down almost at the top, over on the right, you have the card ladder value accuracy. It's posted front and center, not trying to hide anything, just this is where we are. And that's one of the things I appreciate is the transparency that you guys have. The fact that you're out and you're speaking and you're accessible to not just other creators, but to regular old collectors. Like you were talking, it was hard to get your attention at the National because you were so active talking and answering questions and having conversations. So, based on how I just responded about how values are determined now compared to how it was, which might be a bit of a obstacle for some of us, having lived in the Beckett monthly days, now not being able to have the simplicity of what it used to be, but also touching on this card ladder value accuracy is published at right now 74.61%. What are your thoughts on all that, and share your reasoning for sharing this accuracy valuation?
Absolutely. So I love the Beckett analogy, and I think we can demystify a lot of things if we just dig into that for just a second. So the Beckett price guide, and price guide is a deliberately used term. It's in that time and still to this day, I believe it's published. It's a guide. The idea is that it's a guide, not anything definitive. And I think Dr. Beckett would echo that sentiment. And I think that was the general philosophy of the team who worked on that back then and still today. The way that my understanding, based on listening to Dr. Beckett's podcasts over the years, is that the way the methodology that the research team at Beckett used to come up with the prices in the price guide was basically the following. It was basically survey. It was they would allow dealers from around the country to submit results from shows, and they counted on them to be credible and accurate dealers. They obviously wouldn't just take anything from anybody, but if they were a credible dealer, they would ask, how much is this selling for? How much is this going for? They would gather feedback, and they would have to take the impressions and the sentiments of the dealers and the people who are on the ground transacting cards in the show environment. They would have to take that data in, and they would have to interpret it. And they also would send researchers to specific shows, and those researchers would go around and observe and just sort of see what's going on. What is this stickered at? And Dr. Beckett would talk about how this particular methodology would actually allow them to sort of see, well, this card over here is stickered for $5 and it's not moving. It's not selling. It's been here for 3 straight days or something like that. So, we know that it can't be $5, at least not in this region, at least not at this time. So this was the methodology used, and I'm sure Dr. Beckett could elaborate more on that. And I don't want to give it too short of a shrift here. So let's just say that was just me recapping my estimation of what he said. But I'm sure there's more nuance and detail to it. But the bigger point is that was the methodology used at that time, was just sort of observing transacting happening in an in-person environment, taking survey results, interpreting it, analyzing it, and then coming up with a guide price. Okay. Well, nowadays, we don't need to rely on third parties to make these observations. I mean, we can. I love, for a million reasons, but especially just sort of to get a sense of the temperature of a given room at a card show. I love to hear from people's experiences at card shows, like what was selling, what wasn't selling. Where was this a buyer show? Was this a seller show? Were people cautious? Were they excited? So on and so forth. But nowadays we don't really need to rely on that. Nowadays we just have the data. It would be sort of tantamount to back in the 90s that we just actually had a list of all the transactions that happened at a show, and it was in a database, and we could go search it for ourselves. We kind of have that now. So in a sense, we all have access to more information, which is a great privilege, but it also is a responsibility. When we have access to all this information, now we all kind of become little mini researchers on that Beckett price guide team from back in the day, where we now have to wade through the results and come up with our own guide, our own sense of what the price should be. So I think, like, when we kind of break that down and sort of see, like, this is what actually they were doing to come up with those prices, and then think to ourselves, well, now we have so much more data, but we have to filter through it ourselves. We have to look at it ourselves. We have to make the determination. Like the example of the guy who maybe has a card stickered at $5 and it doesn't sell for a whole show, and another dealer might say, oh yeah, I sold 20 of those for 50 or $20 each or something. Like, we go through the same thing as collectors. If we look at sales history, and I'm looking up a card and I'm seeing, let's say I come across a sale of the card for $25, but then I go over to eBay and I see there's 10 other guys who have this card listed for $8. This all factors into the analysis. So we all sort of become our own little researcher in the price guide world. And so to me, I think the key is to get data in front of people, get as much data in front of them as possible, but with some caveats. The data needs to be that if we have strong evidence that data is just illegitimate, then that data shouldn't be in front of people. But that's preempting, I think, a question that might be coming a little bit later. But let me say one other thing about the card letter value estimate, or I don't know. I just kind of went on a rant there, but the card letter value thing is kind of its own discussion too, just because I want to talk about how that value is derived in the first place.
Yeah, I'd share. I mean, I'll put it back on the screen here. So you're talking about this number over here. It says
Yeah.
card ladder value accuracy, 74.61%. Now, to me, when at the top of the dashboard, this is a piece of information that you're showing. Here's the daily sales recap. This is what sold. This is the amount of money worth, like all of this in big, bold letters. It says that you are clearly wanting people to have that information. So how is that data derived? How is that number derived? And what is the reasoning for having it front and center?
Yeah. To answer the last part first, the reason for having it front and center is that that's a very humble number. The number of 74%, that's a C in class, right? That's it's a modest number, and I like the modesty of the number because I think it frames what follows. If somebody says, "Oh, what's this CL value accuracy?" It's one of the first things I see. What is this actually referring to? What does it mean? So, in order to break down what that CL value accuracy means, I kind of got to tell a little bit more about the infrastructure of a card ladder is. And like people who have been using it for a long time will be familiar with this bit, but people who are newer to it might not know about all the infrastructure that exists within this app. When Card Ladder started, this was June of 2020, we had 500 cards and that's it. We had no sales history. We had no industry tab. We had far fewer features. We just had 500 cards. And the whole idea behind Card Ladder and what made it novel at the time and still makes the product novel to this day is that those 500 cards that we had profiles for, they had fully vetted sales history. A researcher had gone through that sales history, had pruned and removed illegitimate bad data. And I can get into more about what that process means if we'd like to. But to keep it short and sweet, that researcher removed the bad data and produced a sales history list for that specific card going all the way back to its first recorded online sales from any marketplaces we could access, all the way up to the present day. And then going forward, every new incoming sale of that card would be reviewed and vetted by a researcher. And so we started with 500. That was a modest amount, a very modest amount, but eventually that database grew. It became a few thousand more. And our research team grew. And so, by the time we ended up getting acquired by Collectors Universe, which was in November of 2021, we had thousands and thousands of cards that we were tracking profiles for. We didn't quite have, if memory serves, I don't think we even had released sales history quite yet. And once we got acquired by Collectors Universe, we were able to bring in 2 more researchers and continue to grow the profile database. Or this is what comprises the ladder itself. The namesake of the product are these vetted card profiles. And so today we have about 80,000 vetted card profiles within Card Ladder. I manage about 30,000 of them. Christina has about 20,000. One of our newer researchers has 20,000, and another has 10,000. And so we all manage these different card portfolios that we all are responsible for tracking every single day. And we do track it every day. When it's Christmas Eve, from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m., I'm going to be looking at sales. And Christina's going to be right there with me looking at her sales. When it's my birthday, I'm going to be looking at sales. On and on for the last 5.5 years now. This is what we do every day. And we love to do it. We love our job. We love our work. But when we review sales and we build out these curated sales histories on these card profiles within the ladder, this was the novel part of Card Ladder from its inception, was that here are people who are knowledgeable about marketplaces, about sales histories, about cards, using that expertise to create a curated, clean data set. Now, I don't make any warranties that it's a perfect data set. I've reviewed millions of sales during my time at Card Ladder in my research capacity. I've probably made thousands of mistakes. When we do make a mistake, whether it's bringing in data that we shouldn't have or keeping out data that we should have brought in, we try to correct it as quickly as possible. But I like to always issue that caveat that I'm not saying that we're perfect. We definitely make mistakes. But what resulted from this compilation of card profiles is that now all of a sudden we have this data set, the only one of its kind in this industry, of millions and millions of vetted sales. And they are specifically assigned to 80,000 different cards. And so from that particular ladder subset of cards with all these vetted sales histories going back to the early 2000s, if the card's old enough to have sales going back that far, we are able to then create indexes, and we can create player indexes. That's one of our more popular uses of indexes. That, like, for example, we have 1,000 Kobe Bryant cards. He's one of the most tracked cards in our database. And the reason why is because when we were first building up the product, we had a feature that doesn't exist anymore. That feature allowed our users to submit cards and upvote or downvote card submissions to say, this is the next card we'd like to see have a full-blown profile and card ladder. So Kobe was one of the most popular, one of the most requested. So he ended up getting 1,000 card profiles and card ladder. He has 1,000. We can, with those 1,000 cards, we can then create a price index. And creating a price index is a pretty simple and straightforward thing. It does require the use of divisors because there's time differences between, one card had its first sale in 2002, another one had its first sale in 2004, etc. I don't want to get bogged down in methodology, but we do have a white paper that's available if anybody wants to read about how these price indexes are constructed. They are price weighted indexes. That's a question we get a lot. But we're able to create these price indexes that are total market indexes within the subset of Kobe's cards within card ladders, card profiles. So Kobe has this index, and Babe Ruth has an index, and Hank Aaron has an index, and Jason Tatum has an index, Tom Brady has an index, on and on. We have thousands and thousands of indexes of different cards who are of players who have fully vetted card profiles. So the way a player gets an index is if they get a price index, if they have fully vetted card profiles within Card Ladder's ladder database. So now we have these indexes that are full of a clean data set, a data set that has been reviewed and vetted, and that hopefully is capturing the good stuff, the good sales that we want to see, and excluding the bad ones. And so from these indexes, not only do we have thousands of player indexes, but we also have category indexes. We have a vintage index. We have a pre-war index. We have lots of different indexes. And all these indexes are special because of the quality of the data set that goes into them. So here's where the card ladder value part comes into play. Card ladder value is simply this. Card ladder value says, I'm going to make up a hypothetical example to illustrate how it works. Let's say that Kobe, who I was just talking about, had a card sell for $500 2 years ago. And let's say that there have been no sales of that card since. So a collector is going to look at that and say, $500 2 years ago, interesting. They're going to do their research. They're going to look into other similar cards. They're going to use their judgment, their experience, their wisdom. They're going to consult friends and so on to try and to value the card for themselves. Well, here's where the card ladder value can just be one tool in their toolkit. Card ladder value will say this. Okay, this card sold for $500 2 years ago. That's a long time ago. So card ladder value's confidence level is going to be the lowest. It's going to be 1 of 5. Every card ladder value that you see has a confidence level. It's just related to how recently the most recent sale of that item was. If it's 2 years ago, that's going to be the lowest confidence level. So it's going to give it a confidence level, and that's going to say, okay, what has Kobe's price index done since that sale? And let's say that in the last 2 years, since the date of that sale, his index is down 20%. Then what the card ladder value is going to do is going to say, okay, $500 was the price 2 years ago. Kobe's index was at X. Now it's at X minus 20%. So that $500 sale is going to generate a card ladder value of $400 today. Just take 20% off. That's all that the card ladder value is doing. It's just taking the applicable index to that player, and it's applying it to whatever the sale is that you're looking at from however long ago it was, and just applying the percentage change to it. That's it. It's just a simple multiplication. Whatever the change in the card ladder value index was that's applicable to that particular card times the price of that card on the date that it happened. That's all that the card ladder value is doing. And so then finally, to get to what you were showing on the dashboard, the card ladder value accuracy. So every night we take a new measurement of card ladder values accuracy across, like last night, for example, when it says total sales verified is 1,426. That means myself, Christina, and the 2 other researchers specifically manually vetted 1,426 sales yesterday. Of those 1,426 sales that we vetted, which ended up getting distributed to a card ladder profile, The card ladder value accuracy on average was 74.61%. So like, if one sale I looked at was 100% accurate, and then the next sale I looked at was 50% accurate, and I only looked at 2 sales, then the card ladder value accuracy would say that was 75%. So here we looked at 1,426 sales yesterday as a team. The average card ladder value accuracy of each of those 1,426 prices that were evaluated was 74.61%. And that's how that number is arrived at. And that's why we like to have that number front and center.
I absolutely love the explanation. I think that a lot of people out there are going to go, "Oh my gosh," like, because that makes sense, especially for some of us that collect players or cards of players that don't show up all the time. You're like, how can you comp a card when there's been one sale that was, like you just said, 2 or 3 years ago? Like, how do you even have any idea what that's worth if you don't have some sort of barometer on what's happening with other cards of that player? So to me, it's one of the it's definitely one of the unique it is the unique characteristic, but I also like the interface, and I also like the search features, and I also like all these other things. Now, how does a new player get added to the index? How do you get an index for a player that doesn't have an index? So, if Jason Dominguez is a young up and coming guy, how do you decide we're adding an index for him?
Yeah, I mean, it's all customer driven still. It's not as formalized as it used to be. Partially because once I manage 30,000 card profiles. Like, you kind of get a critical mass, and right now we have 4 researchers. So we take people will email us on Zendesk, they'll email us on social media, or message us there and just give us suggestions. So, like, for example, I recently built out an index for Cal Raleigh, right? Like, so he's the big dumper. Okay, he's a big deal right now, and we didn't have an index of him yet, and quite a few people reached out actually like, hey, we'd really like to see an index for this player, and so we built it out. Now, in the example where we don't have an index yet, we do have an index for Jason Dominguez too, but in the example where we don't quite have an index yet for a player and or a character, because we track a lot of stuff in the TCG and the CCG world and the entertainment worlds, like Superman has an index, Spider-Man has an index, Pokemon, Charizard has an index, etc. But in the case where we don't have an index yet, then in that situation, and anytime you're looking at a sale on card ladder and you do see a card ladder value, we specifically tell you which index is being used. So like for Kobe, it would be really obvious, right? Like, this is a Kobe card. You're just going to look down towards the bottom of right beneath where that CL value shows up, and then it's going to say this is Kobe's index is being used. But sometimes, like for maybe a more obscure player who doesn't have an index yet, the index that will be used is the CL50. And this is not going to be perfect. It's not even going to be close to perfect. But what the CL50 is, it's 50 iconic cards. It's like a lower grade 52 Topps Mantle, and it's an 86 Fleer Jordan and a mid-tier grade. And the Charizard 1999 is in there, and like stuff like that is in there. And the whole point of the CL50 is just to kind of capture the most general market sentiment. And I'm not saying it's a perfect representation of it by any means, but it's trying to sort of capture that and bring and have grades of cards that transact frequently enough to give the price fluctuation some dynamism, and to have a transaction volume that's going to keep the index updated pretty frequently. So in the case where the player doesn't have, or our character doesn't have an index, we default to the CL50. And then in that case, that's very general. It's just quite literally, this is the generic direction that the market is moving in one way or another. And so whether it's in the case of that, or even in the case where we do have a player specific index and it lines up quite nicely with it, I really like what you and Joe talked about. And Joe kind of made the point that the card ladder value is just a tool. It's just a tool, and you don't need to use it. And if you don't like it, there's a function in the app where you can turn it off. You can go into your settings in the app and you can turn it off. And if you don't want to see it, you don't have to see it. And I won't be offended. So, if you want to turn it off, turn it off. But I think some people do find it helpful. And it's one of the 6 different ways that we allow you to like value your collection if you're in the collection feature too, right? So, it's just a tool. It's just one way to sort of gauge something. I don't even, nothing more profound than that.
Now, for again, this is fascinating for me. when I add a card into my collection, it then asks me which of the 6 tools do you want to use. So sometimes I've have friends that say, "Man, my collection, it says the cards went up by this amount," and I'm like, "Well, what index are you? You know, which of the tools are you using?" Now I'm gonna just I want to quickly, and because I don't want to veer too off, I could talk to you for 3 hours, and we're not going to do that, but I want to use a real life example of what you were just describing of a player who doesn't have an index. So I'm going to pull on the screen. I just typed in 1951 Whitey Ford. I believe Whitey Ford doesn't have an index. The only reason I know that one is because we had once had a conversation about Whitey Ford and he didn't have an index. So
Yeah.
if I go in here to this 1951 Whitey Ford SGC3 rookie card, and it sold for $475. Now, when I'm looking at this here, the index that's used is the card ladder 50 because Whitey Ford doesn't have an index. If I were to change my search here to the Mickey Mantle, so the thing that is kind of what the Whitey Ford is anchored to the card ladder index. So for valuation purposes, if the card ladder index goes up 10%, it's going to kind of pull the card ladder value up 10% because that's what it's attached to. That's what's dragging it that direction. If I change it to Mickey Mantle, who will have an index, and I pull up here, well, let's find one that's okay. So this one here, the index that's listed is the Mickey Mantle index. So if no Mickey Mantle 51 Bowman sells for the next 6 months, but other Mickey Mantle cards are, and it's going to kind of what's happening with Mantle cards. If they're up 15%, it's going to, the card ladder value is attached to that. So if you're listening or watching, that's what he's referring to. And that is a very unique and powerful characteristic that card ladder has that some of the others don't, is that it's attached to something. So for me, being a collector of cards that maybe some of the players don't transact very often, Mordecai Brown cards aren't selling as much as LeBron James cards. Like, well, he may not have a card ladder index, but it's still what's happening with other cards in the industry is how it's pulling up, down, or whatever it is that it's doing. Now, I want to move on to our second thing that I wanted to ask you about because, you know, I've shared at the beginning, people are concerned that people don't know what to think right now. And with all this news and talk about shilling and defensive shilling, the new term that, people are like, wait a second, and people are making justifications, what is and isn't okay, and when it is or isn't okay. The data that we're talking about that these indexes are attached to are only as good as the data. Now, you sharing with us that the vetted data, that there are teams of people who are there who are vetting data, which is keeping that data honest. That's obviously a huge thing. So one of the questions that I've got, and I want to kind of share a couple things first before we get to this, is the shilled auctions, the shilled prices could be affecting data. Things could still sneak through the cracks. And I shared this. You and I had an interaction about it. I shared it on my channel that I just literally fell into this where I was looking at some recent sales data, this Venezuelan mantle. I said 66 mantle. I said $12,900. Like that's insane. Like I know Venezuelan cards are popular. They're not that popular. And so this particular card, it ended up in the search, and Joe and I referred to it. And then the same exact card sold 13 days later. And again, these are the concerns that people have is when this stuff slips through. Now, this is where things went crazy. Not crazy, but my mind blew. Is so you can look at the sales that who bid on this card the first time, and then you can see who bid on it the second time. I don't like the fact that eBay hasn't prevented people from bidding on cards, especially the same card that they didn't pay for. It makes it too easy. One of my personal concerns is these 4 sharp corners, Greg Morris cards. When you're submitting cards through a handler, through an auction house to do it for you, now you're not the listing poster of the card, which could make some of these things easier. That worries me. And so again, here's the same person on the right who bid on the card, who is then bidding on the card on the left. Again, these are the concerns that us collectors are having. And then I got this message posted this morning. This guy said, I was the person who bought that card. I actually bought it the second time. So when it sold for $15.83, and again, it sold for $15.83 on October 19th. So this just happened less than a month, almost exactly a month ago. He said, I had no idea that card had just sold, had been shilled up to 15 or 12,000, 13,000, whatever it was. I bought it. This is crazy. Like, I can't believe it. So and then the Mike Petty down below says, nice job. You made 10K, of course, with his remark. So my question is, you've shared that there's vetting. Things sales history is still going to happen. So what do we do when we find things like this? And what sorts of changes, if any, are Card Ladder currently implementing, currently focusing on more, trying to weed out? Because you beautifully metaphorically shared the trimming off the bad data, like a vine, to produce better fruit and more quality fruit, you got to trim things away and prune it. What are you guys doing? Especially, what can you tell collectors who are freaking out right now? I don't know what to believe about the data.
Terrific question. Terrific example. Love that the winner is just quietly watching the channel. For every
midlife nation member right there.
Midlife Nation, man. For every commenter, which we love in the community, there's 100 more who never who would only chime in that situation, which is pretty. It's a small world, but it's a big community. So I have a few thoughts. So first of all, I want to frame this discussion with a bit of the special insight that I have. So like last night, I looked at about 1,000 sales, and for myself personally. I tend to look at more sales than the other researchers, even though my catalog is only 30,000 of the 80,000, because the stuff that I track transacts a lot. I have in my catalog the stuff that's selling all the time. The stuff that's really quite frequently moving, and so my catalog just gets a lot of sales. So I looked at it about 1,000 last night, and of those 1,000, about 50 of them I ended up excluding. Okay, so that's about excluding for one of many reasons. Sometimes we exclude because I click in, I look at the bid history, I see it's 2-0 feedback bidders going back and forth. I see the item supposedly sold for $12,000, and there's another copy in the same grade available on eBay for $500. Sometimes you just see really obvious, obnoxious things. That's tomfoolery, shenanigans, but really it's worse than that. Really, it's wire fraud. With not to give a legal opinion, but really, these are when people are messing around with manipulating the market and buying back their own items and potentially engaging in all different types of fraud. That these are really serious things that people are doing, and people are playing a dangerous game when they do it, because if they do get caught or if an action gets brought against them, they could get in deep trouble for doing stuff like that. So, but that's just an aside. But so roughly 5%, right? 50 of the 1,000 that I looked at, and that's a little high. Usually that number is a little bit lower. Now, on Card Ladder, every day we have something called the Daily Sales Recap, which gets posted to the feed. Now, it gets posted to the feed in the middle of the night. It gets posted to the feed when all of our researchers have done all of their research for that day. It gets posted to the feed. And that Daily Sales Recap tells you all sorts of information. It tells you how many sales we verified. It tells you which sales are a new record high, which is always exciting to see for that particular card and that particular grade. And then below that, it tells you every single sale that we excluded. And so like I was just kind of going through some of the ones that I excluded last night in preparation for our show and just kind of looking at them. And so thinking to myself here that this is where we start. I think I think a 5% incidence of sales that, yeah, exactly. So this is what you just threw up on the screen is the Daily Sales Recap that got published last night. And there you go. Published 11:52 p.m. sales amounts, total number of sales, and then there's the all-time highs. But if you scroll down on that, you'll see there purgatory, excluded sales that are in need of verification. That's our proper way of describing what they are. The reality is that almost all of these have some sort of big red flag associated with them that caused us to put them into the purgatory file. Now, when we do exclude a sale on a card's profile, we don't just delete it, okay? It's still you can still, within that card's profile, you can still go into the purgatory file and look within the sales history and see the excluded sales. So like, we're not just completely removing it from the view completely. It's still there. If somebody wants to go and do research and see, man, this card has a lot of excluded sales, like what's going on with this? Let me take a look into this. Let me look further into this. We still provide that to have the transparency into that. But that was the first thing I want to frame this discussion with, is that, yeah, you're probably looking at maybe a 5% incidence rate. Now, maybe the stuff that I'm looking at has more bad data. Maybe it has less. I don't know. I'm not sure if it's representative. But also, what was on that screen is that we took in 100,000 sales roughly last night. So if you, on the dashboard, if you just kind of scroll down to right next to where the card ladder value was, total sales added yesterday 97,957. So if there's a 5% incidence rate, then we're talking, about 500 pieces of data. If that rate of junk sales occurring can be applied to the broader data set, then there's probably 500 junk sales that may have come in last night alone. There's also probably 99,000 or however 97,200 of them are probably just fine, but still we have to deal with the junk. And the junk is, sometimes it's honest mistakes. Sometimes it's somebody mistakenly listed a card and they meant to put in $100 and they put 1 penny. And so like that was just, somebody made a mistake. The sale still got printed and it has to get removed. Sometimes you have a sham sale where you have a seller with zero feedback and they obviously don't own the card. They stole the image from some other listing. They put it into theirs and they tried to run an auction real quick and take somebody's money before anybody could catch on to them. Sometimes that happens. Those are more sham transactions. Sometimes there's a shilled transaction where it's clearly these low feedback accounts, or there's plenty of indicators that shilling can happen. It happens. It's out there, and it's not going to stop. I would love for it to stop. We all would love for it to stop, but it's not going to. And so that calls on vigilance. That calls on us as collectors, as members of the community, to be as careful as we possibly can, and to have a modest approach. This is just my personal opinion, but to take a modest approach towards what the value of a data point is. What is a data point? It's something that a marketplace has printed. It's a price that a marketplace has printed. But what were the terms and conditions of the marketplace that issued that price? What were the conditions of the particular auction when it happened? What does the bid history look like? Did they properly photograph the card, or is the photograph terrible? Is it properly titled? Like, all the time we get sales that come in, of a card in, let's say, a PSA 9 condition, and the title didn't make any mention of PSA 9. So then, were all the buyers alerted to the fact that if they were looking for a PSA 9, if they went to eBay and typed in, I want this card in a PSA 9, they wouldn't have seen it, right? Because the listing title neglected to mention it. There's so much context. There's so many different variations and permutations of sales that can happen. It can be manipulated. Sometimes it's not manipulated, but it still produces a weird outlier result. Just awareness, I think, just awareness of the fact that this can happen, and going back, I'm very sensitive to the fact that that there are some newer people to the hobby who are like, man, this is awful. It is awful. This is how I felt 10 years ago when I came back into collecting cards and I was seeing that a lot of this stuff was happening. This was the impetus behind starting Card Ladder, was that we are going to produce the first fully vetted subset of cards. And now we have 80,000 and there's millions and millions of vetted sales, and we use them to create these indexes and create these pricing models. And I'm very passionate about that. It's my life's work, quite honestly, is some of the stuff we've been discussing. So it means a lot to me, but I don't have a silver bullet, Greg. I think we can incrementally work towards it. I think you've made some great suggestions. I also heard the talk about the exclamation mark idea. I want to riff on that with you a little bit if we can, but
yeah,
it's just a tough situation. I'm not a fan of it. It sucks, man. There's bad apples out there, and there's always going to be.
Yeah. Well said. This is absolutely fascinating to me, and hearing you talk about it is fantastic. Explain some of these things. Everything you've said so far is sort of making me feel better about when I use the data at Card Ladder, not worse. And right now there's a lot of negativity because of different, you know, conversations that have been had and stuff. Let me ask you, because you're talking about, we were basically talking about the safeguards that you guys are doing, personally vetting things, putting cards in sales in purgatory, not using them as part of the index, all that kind of stuff. Are there certain auction houses that, because of some of the rules that they allow and what they don't allow, that you guys would or have considered, we're not going to use these auction house results anymore, at least not in the index? Maybe you still post them, but you don't attach them to the index because, well, if they allow people to bid on their own cards, or they allow in-house bidding up to a certain amount, it seems like that would be concerning. So, like, have you guys had conversations, or are you considering what auction houses are trustworthy, and maybe are there some that you should reconsider utilizing?
Yes, and these are ongoing conversations. They've certainly been renewed over the last few weeks, but they're always happening. For and we're very strong. So like, this is a slightly different topic. The paid unpaid topic is a different topic. Paid unpaid is a big issue, but you can still have a paid transaction that nonetheless was manipulated. So paid isn't the end of the story. You want an arm's length paid transaction, and it's important to think about that extra layer too. You want open and honest parties who are acting only in their own interest and not collaborating with or conspiring with other people to manipulate things to get a truly arm's length transaction. But on the paid and unpaid fronts, just for a second to digress on that, because I think it's illustrative. So there are marketplaces that we gladly accept data from, but the thing that makes them a little bit more helpful is that they will only feed us paid information. So
Mhm.
like one marketplace that we will not take data from until they've certified to us that it's paid, and that they publish it to their website that it's paid, is Alt. Right. So Alt is a marketplace that has quite a bit of transparency on their auctions. They'll tell you if it's paid, they'll tell you if it's in process, so you can kind of follow along and wait and see if this is going to end up getting paid. Now, like I said, paid isn't the end of the story, but that's something where we have a relationship with them where it's like we only want to take in paid results. We have that same relationship with Card Hobby. Card Hobby is a very unique situation. We got a lot of pushback from dealers, and we're still reviewing whether or not we're going to continue to display their results, because Card Hobby is a totally different market, right? It's very difficult for some people to be able to sign up and bid and purchase cards and then have them imported and pay the tariffs and everything. It's a very unique one-off situation. Card Hobby is a marketplace that's based in Asia. It's not based in the United States or even in this hemisphere. And so people were like very concerned, are these comps going to come in, and are they going to crash the market and stuff? And we said, well, we always want to err on the side of putting information in front of people. But Card Hobby was one example where right now we are not using Card Hobby comps as constituent parts of any card profiles, and therefore they're not also being used in any indexes. That's an example of that. That's a specific situation where we said we're going to wait, we're going to be cautious, we're going to see how this data set rolls in. And Card Hobby is another one where they specifically only give us sales once they've certified to us that they're paid, nothing before that. So we need the certification from them that the item is paid before we take it in to the sales history database. One that's similar, but not it's similar in spirit, but is Fanatics Collect. So they provide us. They have tons of weekly auction results, and they have the premiere every month. And they feed us data as it happens, and we capture the data as they print the results from their auctions in real time. But then once a month, they feed us a list of unpaid items. And then when they feed us that list of unpaid items, we go through and we remove them all once per month. So that's something just to kind of keep in mind if people are looking at Fanatics Collect results and they're wondering, was this paid or not? That they feed us a list once a month. So if you're looking at something like, for example, they have fed us October's list. So if you're looking at results from Fanatics Collect from October, we have pruned that data set and removed all the items that they certified to us were unpaid. But if you're looking at something from Fanatics Collect that has a date of November, you should understand that the month isn't over. They haven't given us the list from November yet. Okay, so there's some specific examples of like relationships we have with different marketplaces. Now there's other marketplaces that aren't as proactive with us, but that have similar procedures. So Golden Auctions is a marketplace that they remove unpaid results from their database. Now they don't notify us of it, and hopefully we can sooner than later get on one accord with that, and we can get notified of it, or we can have a more expeditious way of gathering that information. But that's helpful because we put a link. Any Golden result that you see in sales history, there is a link out to Golden. And so in the meantime, if one is curious, hey, I'm a little suspicious of this, click the link. And if the link is still live, if it still takes you to a result in Golden's database, then Golden is certifying that it was paid. But here's the thing, paid is not quite the same thing as arm's length. And we've seen that, right? We've seen, evidence here that paid can still, possibly be a part and parcel of a market manipulation. Or, sort of to the point that Jeremy was making on Saturday night, I heard you and Joe gesturing in the direction of this point, that that market manipulation can trickle and spill over. It can trickle down, it can spill over, it can impact other things. And this is a frustrating and a tough situation, okay? And I'm not sure that I have a great solution. I'm not sure that I have a silver bullet, but we look at the marketplaces, we evaluate them. So on the topic of the marketplaces and sort of evaluating each one, like you guys kind of were discussing this idea. I think Teapot was discussing this idea too about that market movers might put an exclamation mark next to certain auction houses to sort of raise caution or create, hey, like just take notice here that there's a policy that you should know about. I think it's a good start. But here's where I was going, Greg, and here's my idea, and maybe you could nitpick it or shoot it down, or maybe you like it. My idea is that I think it needs to be more robust. I think that we need to gather a few folks who have some level, preferably more, of experience in the law, in consumer protection, and in the sports card hobby. So the more people we could get with some mix of that skill set, the better. And they could create essentially a ratings agency. And the way that this would work is they would do comprehensive reviews, and they would update them from time to time of the different policies and terms and conditions of all the different marketplaces. And then they would create an objective criteria that would grade them. So for example, if there's an auction house out there that very specifically says employee and executive bidding is completely outlawed. Nobody who works for this company in any way, shape, or form can bid on the items. We don't do reserves. We don't allow consigners to bid on their own items. And we strongly discourage any form of manipulation or any purpose of bidding other than strictly to buy the card to own it in an arm's length fashion. So like those would be some of the criteria. I'm just kind of going off the cuff here. But we come up with all the criteria, and if an auction house satisfies all of them in their terms and conditions, they get the highest grade. They get an A+. And maybe there's another auction house that meets a lot of them, but in their terms and conditions, we discover that that auction house does allow reserves, and that they don't disclose the reserve until 3 days before, and that the house can bid on behalf of the consignor up to that reserve. So in that case, okay, maybe that one's a B+. And then there's an explanation assigned to each one that says, here's why this got a B+. It met this, this, and this, but it didn't meet this. Now that's a big project. It's a bigger project than it even sounds like what I'm describing, because inevitably auction houses are going to respond to this, and that's going to be a good thing. Marketplaces and auction houses are going to respond to this. They're going to say, man, we should probably update our terms here, or we should really figure out where we stand on this and figure out how we want to engage with the public and with collectors and with consumers. And inevitably they're going to update their policies. And so when they do update them, the ratings agency needs to be on top of that. They need the auction house. It should be incumbent on them to notify, but also they need to be proactively updating things and keeping things up to date. So it's going to be a chore. It's going to be a real task for somebody to take that on. But I think if we're going to do this, that's one suggestion I have, is that we really do it properly and we do it fairly, and we take into consideration all the different factors that are applicable here, and then they could issue a ratings. And then if that gets created and it's sustainably created and it's going to be updated and it's going to be taken care of over time and build relationships with the marketplaces and stuff, I'm confident that the team at Card Ladder will look at that, and we would import that rating and we would assign it to each of the marketplaces. So that when you're looking in Card Ladder sales history, you would see, so here's so and so marketplace, here's its rating. So that's ambitious, I know, and maybe it's asking too much, but I was thinking for like an hour or two after listening to you and Joe talk about it, and that's kind of where I landed on it.
So I mean, again, my head is spinning with ideas and thoughts, and there's fireworks and stuff going on. Let me ask you a quick follow up question, and then I want to respond to that. Would this be an independent panel, an independent team organization, or would this be like Card Ladder is going to create their graders, their grading team on the reliability and the conditions of the different auction houses?
Selfishly, I would love for it to be independent because I don't have time to do this.
Yeah.
but we if Card Ladder can help, we will. Um, I would love to be a part of it in some way, shape, or form. And independent might just be better too, because then it's divorced from any potential bias that any particular platform might have. So, for example, we maintain relationships with the marketplaces.
Yeah.
Like we're
Yeah.
collecting and reporting their data, and we rely on them to give us accurate data and stuff. So, it probably in all this is just off the cuff here, but sort of thinking this through, it probably needs to be someone independent. It probably shouldn't be someone who already has a relationship with these entities, which we do.
So I love it. And I think that it's something where it would definitely need to have buy in from the big entities in order for the auction houses to actually respect it. Because if me and my buddies, got together every quarter and gave the updated grade and we said, oh, the midlife grade is this, it's like, huh. But if, Card Ladder's involved, if PSAs involved, if you could go through all the different companies, we all could. Then I agree with you. And what you're offering, what you're suggesting is actually a step towards a solution. So if the auction, because the part of the problem is if the auction houses have too many rules in place about what people can't do, they're not going to get submissions because they're going to go, well, over there I can bid my stuff up and I can make sure I don't lose it for cheap. So they're going to need an outside group to pressure them. And so in my county, every restaurant has posted on the window a grade, and the restaurant grade is based on when they have the food inspectors come in and what the cleanliness is. And so they don't want to have a C or a D posted on the front window, and it legally has to stay there. So when you walk up to a restaurant, you go, oh, this is an A. Like they don't have cockroaches walking around. Like that does something for the confidence of the consumer. I think this is a fantastic idea. I hope that if it happens that you'll consider including me on it. And I think that there are a lot of people that would be willing to do it. I also think it's a place that I think a lot of us in the hobby that maybe aren't um, necessarily feel like we're on the same team as. It could be a place for common ground. It could be a place where, people kind of go, hey, we have our differences. Maybe we're competitors in this area. Maybe you think about vintage cards and I think about modern cards, but we all can come together. And if you get some of the big names in the industry, some of the big dealers, some of the big, you know, uh, even YouTubers or Instagram people, and you get them together to do this, it could be a grassroots way. So I'm in. I love it. I want to be a part of it. So if you start to take next steps with it, uh, make sure my name's involved and thrown in the hat. Let me ask one follow-up question to the big explanation that you were giving about some of the safeguards and stuff that you've put into place. And that follow-up question is, can you not just require that if you're going to use the sales data from Golden, they have to provide it to you? Or is it sort of a tricky situation because they might just say, well, screw you, we're not going to give you any data? Is that the concern? Because ideally, all of the data that you're getting fed from all of the auction houses would have their paid. Again, it's not perfect because again, we know that there's, people probably bidding on their friends' stuff, as we've heard apparently is happening. It would at least have some assurance of paid. And is that not something you can require of the data that you collect from the auction houses and the marketplaces that you collect it? Are you just not at the point where you feel like you can demand that and you need cooperation, you can't require cooperation?
Yeah, and it's a technological burden on a lot of them. We've asked, obviously, and we'd love to have it, but and not just us, but in general. And I think it wouldn't just so it would be great for the card ladder tool, to receive data in that fashion. But it would be even better, setting aside our interests, if it was just publicly published that way. Everybody could see it. You don't need a
Yeah.
card ladder membership to see it. If you want to go to so and so's marketplace and look at their results, and then you can have the confidence that what you're looking at has been certified as paid. And they're in different marketplaces have different ways of doing that. So like Alt, for example, they have a pretty sophisticated way of listing. This was paid, this wasn't, so and so. And not to put them on a pedestal or to, every marketplace comes with its shortcomings and so on and so forth. But they have a system that might be worth looking at. But Golden has a system too. Golden's system is pretty is similar in the sense that if it's in their database and the window of collecting payment has passed, then they are tacitly telling you that it's paid. So and Golden is litigious with non-payers too. If you ever get bored, you want to go look on Golden one day for lawsuits that have been filed against non-payers. They do exist. They do go after people who don't pay. So those are in other words, we, as much as we would love to get that data, we would also love if it was just publicly displayed in that fashion. And there are different ways, like Golden has their way of doing it. eBay has a way of doing it. It's not a foolproof either, but their seller tool, which is available, is called Terrapin, and it has a very high, it's not perfect, but it has a high success rate of indicating payments. We rely on that tool when we're vetting sales, and it's pretty good. But I found different examples over the summer where there were a few items that I can 100% confirm were paid. I talked to eBay sellers a lot. It is course in the course of my job, and I sometimes reach out to people and say, "Hey, this isn't in Terrapin. Did this get paid?" And I had several examples that I documented on my Twitter or on my X. I mean that showed that these items were paid, and the seller's confirming they're paid, and they're showing me the screen from within their eBay control panel that says that it was paid, but it's not showing up in Terrapin yet. So even Terrapin isn't perfect, but perfection isn't. Perfection is too lofty. I think just we want to get as close to it as we can, and so Terrapin is a helpful tool in that regard. There's a general understanding that if it's in Terrapin, it was paid. If it's not in Terrapin, that doesn't necessarily mean it wasn't paid. But Terrapin can be a helpful tool for evaluating eBay. But it's scattered. The resources are scattered. It's sort of scattered. Like it kind of works differently for everybody and in different situations. Like I
What
would
I
love it.
hear
I
you
would love it,
say though
Greg.
too is you guys are working on it. You are continuing to try to improve the data, find ways to vet it. And I think that's what people need to hear. I think people need to know you are doing a lot of things to vet it, and you're working on additional ways to continue to improve the data. And hopefully, again, one of the positives that comes out of some of the recent drama is maybe it might finally be the spark to kind of light some of this action. And if there's somebody out there listening who has a little bit of clout, has a little bit of legality, has a little bit of money to try to start to form a group like this, a council like this, I hope that you guys will reach out, and I'm sure others will want to be involved. Now, I thought we were going to go about 45 minutes, where we just crossed the hour mark not that long ago. I'm actually recording with Jeremy in 14 minutes, but there are two things I have to ask you. So if you can give me a quick response to a couple of things, because I'm really curious on these two things. I think other people might be as well. The first one is you're a one of one collector, and because of that, it's very difficult to comp. And that's similar to anybody who collects something rare, doesn't transact very often, or never transacts. So if you could give me a two or three, and I know I've listened to your podcast, which I love. I listen to the crossover, which I love. I listen to you on Sports Cards Live every Saturday, which I love. And I've heard you, I know you could give me a 2 hour, literally, you could give me a 2 hour response to this question.
Yeah.
But if you were to give me, and somebody out there who's listening, there's this card I want, it became available. I don't know how to figure out what it's worth. It's super rare. with the card ladder tools that they have, what is your quick explanation to how you comp a card that doesn't transact?
Yep. Keep it short and sweet here. Two heuristics. Number one, similar card, same player. And number two, similar player, same card. So if I'm looking at the new Tops basketball just came out, and I'm learning Tops all over again. And let's say I'm looking to comp Jason Tatum's. I'm assuming Tatum's in the checklist. Jason Tatum's foil fractor 1 of 1. Okay, and it obviously hasn't sold yet, but a dealer's got it at a show. I'm going to do the similar card, same player. So I'm going to go look for other Jason Tatum 1 of 1s that come from a paper product. Maybe I would go look, see if I can find any, like Don Russ might be a decent analog to Panini's Ultra Modern offering for Topps flagship. It's not perfect. Hoops is another one that might be kind of close. So I would go look for like Hoops and Don Russ, paper 1 of 1s of Jason Tatum from within the last 5 years, and I would kind of start triangulating from there. But I have to dig into the checklist too, because I know that Tatum has 4 different base set 1 of 1s in 20, 25, 26 Tops. He might only have 1 to one of those Don Russ products, and that can be a factor too. I want to take in all the information, but so that's the first way is that we do a similar card, same player, and then the second way is the similar player, same card. So now I will go look for, so I'm trying to comp Tatum's 2025-26 Topps foil fractor 1 of 1, but so instead I'm going to go look for other 2025-26 Topps foil fractor 1 of 1s of similar players. So I'll go see if Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has had a sale of his, and I as an aside, I know that he has. Or I'll go look and see if Donovan Mitchell has had a sale of one, or Anthony Edwards. Has Anthony Edwards had one sell? Or whoever the players I feel have a comparable market demand, a comparable collectability, maybe a comparable career, and I'll start to triangulate that way. So now I'm looking at the same card, but a different. It's not quite Jason Tatum, but it's the same card for other players. So I triangulate from both of those directions, and but at the end of the day, you kind of go. You got to trust your gut too a little bit.
Yeah, I love it, and I really enjoyed the podcast that you did that went through the Jordan card, the Jordan 1 of 1 that you acquired through a trade deal and trade and cash and stuff. Like it was like an hour and a half whole explanation of how that all played out. And I absolutely loved it. And you just gave us exactly what I asked for, a snippet of what kind of process someone might go through. Now, I'm going to ask this because I would be remiss if I didn't. Okay. I have a second channel with a couple of partners on that channel, Mike Junkwax Hero, Adam Splendid Sports. If people are not subscribed to Sports Card Clubhouse, I hope that you will. Again, we're on Spotify, Apple, but also on YouTube. Mike had an interview on Saturday with Teapot, who was in the news as he was pulled into some of this shilling controversy. And Teapot had a few things to say about card ladder and card ladder values. Now, I think you did a good job explaining kind of how comprehensive the card ladder methodology is and why it's so good. That said, because you're my guy, because I stand with Card Ladder, a lot of people reach out to me and go, well, what do you think about what Teapot said? And seeing as how this was, a channel I'm a partner on, and Teapot said a few things about, Card Ladder valuation and stuff, I felt the need to at least say, and I'm not looking for a tit for tat and a back and forth. That's not how we roll. That's just not how you are. That's not how I am. But I do want to give you the opportunity to at least address the fact that he, made some claims about card ladder valuations being wildly inaccurate.
Yeah, sure. I don't know. It depends on the definition of wildly. Like we published the card ladder value accuracy. It was 74 point something% yesterday. Is that wildly inaccurate? Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. I really admire how the podcast network and just the network among you fellows in general is it's so far reaching, right? And that kind of is the role of a content creator, is like, you can collaborate with me, and then Mike can collaborate with Teapot, and then back and forth, and everybody can sort of participate in the marketplace of ideas, which is ultimately where I'm going here. Is that I think it's important for people to have voices and to share their opinions on things, even if it's critical. I won't lie. Like, anytime somebody says something critical of Card Ladder, it stings. This is my life's work. The sort of it changed the whole trajectory of my life. I was fully planning on becoming a lawyer, and then we did Card Ladder, and it's what I've done ever since. And it's meaningful. It's deep. It's something that I care about too much. So it can sting when people say critical things, and I acknowledge that, and I just look, sometimes I can be a hothead, but I try to just let it pass, and then I try to find the truth in it. I really do. I try to find the truth in it. I try to find where the person's coming from their point of view. I try to have empathy to that point of view, and then there is a kernel of truth to that. Some of the opinion that was expressed also is that should we really be displaying value estimates, like, in general? Is that a good thing or not to be displaying them? And that's a valid question. He isn't the only person to raise it. We've had other people message us and ask us, do you think that's a good idea or not too? And generally, I just give them the spiel. I say, this is how Card Ladder value works, and there's a white paper that's available online that explains exactly how it works. If you wanted to, you could go sit down in front of a spreadsheet, take the same sales data that we're using, you could calculate it, you could get the exact same value. There is no black box. This is a 100% replicable method of valuing something. It's fully transparent. And so, but I hear it, people say, well, maybe there shouldn't be this value estimate because it could be misinterpreted, or it could be seen as, trying to set the value for something. And that's not what you're trying to do, but it could be misinterpreted that way. And so I hear that, and I think those are valid points. I don't know that there's a perfect answer or a perfect reply to those things. What I do know is that, generally speaking, I try, and we philosophically try, to err on the side of giving people more tools, giving people more information, giving people more access to more things, and then ultimately trusting them to use it in the way that they see fit. But I hear the criticism, and like, that's one of the reasons why when we introduced Card Ladder, we didn't always have the feature that let you turn it off. It was after we got criticism from people who said, I don't really want to see this. Okay, we can fix that. You can literally go into your settings and turn it off. So, it's not, so here's what we do. We give you a white paper that tells you exactly how it was calculated. You could replicate it for yourself. We give you a number every day that tells you the accuracy of the value itself. And then we give you a feature that lets you turn it off. So I think we've tried to make a lot of steps. We've tried to make a lot of accommodations to cater to the concerns that people have had. But at the same time, still, for the many people who like using it as a tool in their toolkit, still allow them the ability to see that number if they want to see it.
Very gracious, very humble. Appreciate that response. I could not have had more fun over the last 73 minutes. I mean that. This was absolutely a blast for me. I learned a lot. I had fun. I hope those out there listening had some of your questions answered, some of your scratches got itched. But I can tell you, Hoj, genuinely, number one, I appreciate your time, but I'm more confident in Card Ladder now than I've ever been. Truly, after hearing what you had to say, answering those questions. I hope we can do this again sometime. Thank you for your time. Anything you want to say before we shove off?
Love to come back anytime you'd be willing to have me, Greg. Huge fan of the channel. And we've had a Card Ladder. We've had a lot of people reach out to us who said they heard about us through you. They heard about us through the Midlife channel. And it just means a lot to be partnered with you, man. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, everybody out there. Thanks for listening. If you have follow-up questions for maybe the next visit with Mr. Hoj, down below in the comments, feel free to leave those and we could address them next time.